Hello, everybody. I hope you've had a wonderful week. Again, I'm Miss Tyler, and it is time for our notes about the westward expansion. Make sure that you have your note taker out and you are working on those key terms as we go through. You're going to want to buckle up because we are covering a lot today. I'm going to go kind of quick so that we can try to keep it in 15 minutes. All right, here we go. We're going to be talking about manifest destiny. This is a very famous piece of artwork, basically saying the artist was trying to show that it is our destiny to expand and to take over these Western lands. It is our godly duty. Well, we'll see about that. All right, so it is a belief shared by many Americans in the mid-1800s that the United States should expand across the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. President Polk believed it was our manifest destiny or obvious fate to settle land all the way to the Pacific Ocean in order to spread democracy. So manifest destiny was a phrase created in the 1840s by an American journalist. It was used to justify American westward expansion into areas such as Texas, Oregon, and California. Manifest destiny refers to the widely held belief that the United States system is better than any other. We are the biggest, we're the best, we have the best government, the best economy. You will still hear people talk like this today. So maybe you can see that connection. Therefore, the United States had both a right and a duty to spread out across the entire continent. American expansion was inevitable, necessary, and they believed it had been ordained by God. Well, you can imagine how the Native Americans probably felt about this. As it was happening. What came with this? Racism, folks. If you have not been paying attention to American history, racism is embedded throughout our whole history. It's appalling, it's horrible, but we got to learn about it so we can make sure it doesn't continue, okay? The idea that white people were superior to Native Americans, Mexicans, and European immigrants was embedded in the racist beliefs of the supporters of manifest destiny. We need to conquer you. We are white. It is our godly duty to teach you the right ways to live. We all feel that way, right? But we're starting to change that, right? So white settlers believed that it was destiny for them to have the land and not others. Very convenient, might I add. Supporters wrongly believed that the United States way of life was superior to other cultures. Many settlers hoped to expand the institution of slavery in the West. Thankfully, that did not happen. As we already know, since we're talking about something in the past. All right, so let's talk about the Missouri Compromise of 1820. This is a big deal, especially as it relates to slavery, all right? So Missouri had applied for statehood. Let me just move my little picture over. Missouri had applied for statehood at a time when there were 11 free states, 11 slave states, right? There was a balance and equilibrium. But guess what? Missouri Compromise concerned the territory acquired from the Louisiana Purchase, if you think back to a couple weeks ago, okay, which both expanded America's land holdings while also posing a threat to the delicate balance achieved in Congress, all right? The dilemma began with the application Missouri as a slave state. That's right, folks, you are living in a state that wanted to be a slave state. If admitted, Missouri would upset the even proportion of slave states and free states within the US Senate, since at the time there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. The compromise's problem would become known as the Missouri Compromise of 1820. All right, so let's dive in. So Missouri became a slave state. Maine became a free state. Louisiana Territory was divided at the 360-degree, 30-minute parallel north of the line must be free territory. South of the line could be slave territory. Okay, entry of states into the Union have to be balanced. For every one free state, there would be one slave state in order to try to keep that balance, okay? So the compromise kept the balance of power in Congress between free and slave states, but for only a short time. The issue of territorial expansion and slavery dominated national politics through the 1840s and 50s. So think about that, you guys. That's not even that long ago when this was happening. So let's take a look at this map. you can see on here the dividing line, okay? So the problem is, right, Missouri technically is above that line. That is the line, right, that they said if you are below it, you can be a slave state, but Missouri was in fact above it. All right, so let's talk about some innovations in travel that are leading towards westward expansion. All right, so these new inventions are making it easier for settlers to travel west. Okay, there was some bold projects like the Erie Canal. It connected farmers in the west, the cities, to the western cities in the east. That came out weird, sorry. The train wagon was the modern equivalent of a mobile home. So it made it, think back guys, it would take forever. If you ever played Oregon Trail, the game from the 1990s that I played, and somehow my family always died from dysentery. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google Oregon Trail and play it. You can find it free online. Okay, the train wagon was very exciting. So how did they get here? Let's take a look at this map. You can see most of us have heard of the Oregon Trail, right? That's going to be starting in Missouri, going up, headed up northwest, okay? But we also have the Santa Fe Trail, okay? We have the California Trail, and we also have the Desert Trail. So there was a couple different paths for migration to head west during Western expansion. All right, so let's talk about Oregon Country 1846. All right, in 1820, both the US and Britain claimed to own Oregon Country. As you can imagine, this is a problem. In the 1830s and 1840s, thousands of American pioneers were going west to settle in Oregon Country. President Polk wanted all of Oregon to the 54-50 parallel. The American people cried, 54-40 or fight. Neither Polk nor Britain wanted war. Think back to what happened to our last war, right? Britain and the US compromised. They split Oregon in half at the 49th parallel. The US got the southern half. All right, so let's take a look at the Oregon Trail. The only way west by land was via the Oregon Trail. 2,170-mile route starting from Independence, Missouri. That's right, folks, right next to us, just east a little bit. 50,000 ultimately made the trip. Dangerous and difficult, disease, starvation, weather, terrain, right? We didn't have the modern conveniences we have today. It was bare bones. All right, let's talk about the Donner Party of 1846. All right, settlers bound for California took a southern route known as the California Trail. This path went through the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Settlers tried to cross the mountains before the first snow. Guidebooks helped pioneers find their way. Following a guide and shortcut, the Donner Party left the California Trail and got lost. They were trapped in the Sierra Nevada in winter. They were stuck without food and resorted to eating the dead to survive. 42 of 87 died. Okay, think about how disgusting. It's very famous if you look up the Donner Party. All right. Santa Fe Trail. It's the route or road from Mexico City and Mississippi River that went through Santa Fe, New Mexico. You can kind of see there in that squished in little map. The Mormon Trail. This was fairly significant. So Mormons led by Joseph Smith were being threatened for their religious ideas and traveled to Utah from Missouri and Illinois from 1846 to 1868 to set up a place where it was safe to practice their beliefs. All right, Texas, 1830s. In 1821, Texas was a part of Mexico. In case you didn't know, that is always interesting, which we'll learn about more. Stephen Austin was an impresario, which was an agent to bring settlers to Texas. Stephen Austin brought the first 300 families to Texas, known as the Old 300. All right, by 1830, 25,000 Americans were living in Texas. They were required to become Mexican citizens and become Catholic. You can already tell that that's probably going to pose a very big problem. Okay, the Americans had to follow Mexican law. When Americans complained, Mexico closed Texas to further immigration. Very interesting, especially when you think about nowadays, it's usually people from south of the border trying to come to America, right? So it was actually the opposite. So then we have the Texas Revolution. After Mexico closed Texas to Americans, Stephen Austin went to negotiate with the Mexican leader, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Austin was jailed and the Texans revolted. In February 23rd to March 6, 1836, Mexico attacked the Texans at the Alamo. Sounding familiar? I think so. This 13-day siege resulted in the killing of all the Americans except some women, children, and slaves. In April, the Mexican army massacred the Texan rebels at Goliad. After the Alamo and Goliad, Sam Houston surprise attacked Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad. Texas won its independence. This is why you will even hear today, Texas is obsessed with their independence, and they call it the United States of Texas if you go there. All right, Texas statehood, 1845. Santa Anna was captured and forced to sign a treaty giving Texas its independence. Texas became an independent nation in 1836 called the Lone Star Republic. So if you ever wondered why it was called the Lone Star State, now you know. Sam Houston became president. Annexation of Texas was delayed. Worried that adding Texas as a slave state would upset the balance between free and slave states, fear that annexing Texas would lead to war with Mexico, Texas joined the U.S. and became the 28th state in 1845. So that's how the U.S. acquired that mega state of Texas. All right, so now let's talk about the war with Mexico, 1846 to 48. All right, President Polk wanted to expand the U.S. territory clear to the Pacific Ocean. He offered to buy California and New Mexico territories from Mexico for $30 million. Mexico refused. After the U.S. annexed Texas in 1845, Mexico and the U.S. disagreed on the Texas border. The U.S. claimed the Rio Grande River. Wonder why they would want that. Water, life. Mexico claimed the Nueces River. The U.S. sent troops to patrol the border. Conflict broke out and the Mexican army killed U.S. troops on disputed land. Polk declared war, claiming Mexico spilled American blood on American land. All right. So the U.S. Army had better weapons and equipment, but it was greatly outnumbered by the Mexican force and was poorly prepared. The U.S. took New Mexico territory without a fight and claimed the territory. Interesting. Zachary Taylor defeats Santa Anna at the Battle of Buena Vista. U.S. troops under Winfield Scott, called Old Fuss and Feathers, captured Mexico City. This led to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the war. All right, massive killing wars, no good, but that is the sad way that we acquired New Mexico. All right, so the Bear Flag Revolt, 1846. Small group of American settlers seized the town of Sonoma. Americans declared California an independent nation and made a grizzly bear flag. Interesting side note, the state flag of California still has a grizzly bear on it. John C. Fremont was leading a mapping expedition to the Sierra Nevadas. He joined the American settlers in the revolt against the Californios. Shortly after, U.S. naval forces came ashore in California and raised the stars and stripes. They claimed California for the United States. All right, so Mexican Cession, 1848. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico gave the U.S. the territories of California, Nevada, and Utah, most of Arizona and New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The U.S. also claimed Texas north of the Rio Grande River. You didn't think we acquired all this land in America easily, did we? The U.S. paid $15 million for the territory. Sweet deal. Today, this is the American Southwest. Mexican cession increased the size of the U.S. by 25%. So still not as much as the Louisiana Purchase, but still by quite a bit. All right, let's talk about the California Gold Rush of 1849. Gold was found in Sutter's Mill in 1848. Why I do that voice, I don't know. It just seems appropriate for what we're talking about. In 1849, about 80,000 gold seekers known as 49ers came to California hoping to strike it rich. I mean, it's the equivalent of winning the lottery today, right? Is what they're talking about. So panning for gold was the simplest method. A miner fills a pan with dirt. He then puts the pan under water, shakes it, Gold weighs less, so it should settle to the bottom and you can strike it rich. Okay, here we go. That's what panning looks like. I actually grew up in the West Coast and did this on a field trip. All right, so what is the impact of this? The arrival of the 49ers created a population boom. Immigration increased, diversity of the population. California became a state in 1 year. Gee, I wonder why we wanted to acquire California. Growth of new businesses and industry transformed California's economy. Gold mining was important, but farming and ranching grew. Very, very important, okay? Discrimination of Californios and Native Americans ensued. Again, very horrible that so much of our history is based on the racism and on the backs of the people. So make sure that you are keeping to change that today. Okay. And that is the end of our presentation. I hope that you learned something, and I will see you in a little bit.